Maxim, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you for coming. We are here in the building of Axel Springer in Berlin. You work here. You are co-CEO of Idealo, and you have a very special, interesting website. There you say, I quote, "Hi, I'm Maxim. I'm interested in science, business, and people. At the age of 25, I founded an institute, an university institute." And that is so attractive. And then you go on about career and so. Could you please tell yourself what you think is important in your stages of career development, so we can follow a little bit what happened?
It's a very good question, yes. So obviously there's the formal biography that you can read on LinkedIn, or what I've written about. Maybe before we go there, I think the three core aspects that shaped me were, number one, my heritage and my lineage. My father is born in Tehran in 1934 and studied here in Germany in the 50s and 60s, biology and chemistry, and stayed here. Later on, as scientist, became an entrepreneur. So that's this lineage. And by the way, also my grandfather studied in the roaring 1920s here in Berlin, engineering. I think that's what my family says. I never met him. He had a time of his life here.
20s.
Exactly. My mom comes from a family of butchers from East Germany.
Okay.
And my grandfather and grandmother fled from East Germany in the mid-1950s, 1956 if I'm correct. So my background is on both sides an emigration background. Both mother and father left their home. Yeah. So I think this shaped my family, my sister, myself quite a lot. It was not a topic that we talked about at all, actually, but subconsciously, obviously, the experiences of emigrating from A to B does something to you as father and mother, and subsequently also to you as son and daughter. So I think that shaped me, number one, a lot. And my dad's family, most of them emigrated then later on to the United States, when in 1979 there was the Islamic Revolution. So with a very young age, we always went to the US visiting my family, and that brought me out of my bubble, right? Yep. So I had my German bubble. I was brought up in kindergarten and junior school, and so there was always this perspective of other cultures, primarily the Persian and the US American in the early years. And again, my mom comes from a family of butchers, and they worked with their hands and very robust. Also highly traumatized by war, that part of the family. And so I think that was number one. Number two, with the age of 19, I joined the paramedic service. In Germany we had until recently military service or civil service, and I chose to work on an ambulance. And with age 19, obviously, again, you've had your bubble, your friends, your family, school. I never had contact with a homeless person, with someone who was addicted to drugs, with elderly people who are in elderly homes, left alone. So those were experiences during that period, 19, 20 years of age, that shaped my personality a lot. Being forced out of that bubble and seeing the plurality of life, or that there are more colors to what I used to think of is reality. And last but not least, very recently, also private things that shaped me a lot. The birth of our children, and I stay on this part a bit more vague. The challenges of marriage, and two individuals coming together and learning that they are not only now a couple but also mother and father, and with all the ups and downs, left and right, associated with that. And I think one thing, since I'm open with this, I learned recently that I have adult ADHD, and that has also had significant impact on understanding who I am, why I am the way I am, how my impulses are, where they are coming from. And so I'd say you don't find these three things on my LinkedIn profile or in any biography. However, they are important pieces of my DNA, who am I right now.
Yeah.
But you wanted to talk about the career paths, since you...
No, that's much more interesting, but I'm really thankful you are so open. And my aspect of doing all these interviews and everything is that I see or I experience that down to the bottom, it's always the same, not the same, but a similar pattern. And when you say number 2, you have worked on an ambulance, then the empathy hits in. And it is a huge point with every successful personality. Without empathy, nothing happens. And that's what drives me. And obviously, as you told now, it drives also you, that you had these experiences that shaped you. And that's so interesting, because I always ask, what do you think, what drives you really? And people who have these stages of career, they advance, they can exactly hint or know what drives them. And you are obviously also, you have other traits, I don't know, empathy we have, this is correct, you say, I am curious about.
Yeah, exactly. So the empathy part, certainly, I don't know how much it is part of someone's core DNA or how it is, you know, what's the foundation of it. Clearly, the social setup I was being exposed to, right? So with both parents from different cultures, also with very different core personalities, being empathetic to, you know, what does the dad do, what does the mom do, what do they talk about, and what do they mean when they talk about what they talk about. Empathy certainly becomes a skill to be trained and learned, to really understand what is my opposite really saying when he or she is saying it. What's the motivation behind it? What's the root consideration behind it? So, and then obviously I didn't mention I spent time in Canada during high school years, which my time many people did in the US or Canada, New Zealand, etc. That shaped certainly also. But however, it was, to me, that was not really a culture shock, because I felt Canada, the Canadian culture, was in many degrees very similar to, let's say, the European culture, since the roots are also quite similar. Now, those three facets certainly shaped my life, and then going forward with my career, I started to study in a small town in Bavaria, Bayreuth it's called. I didn't stay there for too long because I felt it was too cold there, the weather. But seriously, I wanted actually to study in a classical British-American bachelor perspective. I didn't know that was what I wanted to do, which with a kind of fundamental studies attached to your core. And in Germany, you had at that time to decide early on basically your major and your master, and you couldn't go left and right. So when I started business in Bayreuth, it was just business, and I was interested in Kant, in the philosophy of colors, and so on and so on. It was not possible to look into those topics beyond your core studies. So that's when I then found out there's another interesting university in Germany that offers this fundamental studies as part of your degree. And that's when I switched there. And it was beautiful to learn about the philosophy of the right and taekwondo courses and understanding theater plays and analyzing them and playing them. So that was part of then the business studies which I did. And actually it was probably the surviving factor of me finishing my degree, because I felt business studies in itself was a bit dull, right? So, so from there, I stayed some time at Royal Dutch Shell in London, because they have a very interesting approach on developing strategy, which is scenarios. In the 1960s, they started to do this. This has to do with Royal Dutch Shell's association with MIT in Boston, and MIT was the scientific place that did the war games for the Pentagon. And war games is actually scenarios, right?
Yeah.
So think of how our war could play out. And MIT then adopted those war game theory and approach into a kind of business approach, thinking in scenarios, determining a corporate strategy. And Shell was one of the very first companies to adopt this. And one of the scenarios they played was the oil crisis. What happens if OPEC stops delivering oil? They did that in the late 60s.
Okay.
And boom, if I may say, shit hits the fan a few years later. That happens. And Shell, due through that scenario thinking and applying those results from their scenario planning into action, they diversified. They invested into not only oil, but gas and soon renewables. And that's why they were better equipped once the oil crisis then hit.
Yeah.
So I wanted to learn scenario planning, and I learned that at Royal Dutch Shell. And my task was develop scenarios for climate change. How will climate change affect our planet, our business, our competitors? And that was in 2004. And that was great because with Shell's resources, I was allowed to meet not all, but many experts around the world from various fields, giving their perspectives on how climate change will evolve over the next 20, 50, 100, 300 years. And still as a network I'm attached with. From there I learned that technique, I learned a lot about climate change, and I learned I didn't want to work for Royal Dutch Shell. It is a great company, but it was, to me at that time, it was a corporate career and not an entrepreneurial career. And I learned I maybe feel more entrepreneurial. I need to execute my own ideas and be responsible for that, both if it fails and if it succeeds. So I went back to my university and we started the University Institute on Corporate Governance, which was aimed at looking how supervisory boards function in Central Europe. Because we have, you might know, there's this saying, the fish smells from the top. This is now a German saying, translated in a very bad way into English. But so the supervisory board is the entity of a corporate organization that supervises the management board, the Vorstand. And at that time, we're now in 2005, it was still a routine that former executives immediately switched from a management role into the supervisory role. Often men, often very old. And it was not a profession regarded in most cases as a full-time job. However, it is quite a full-time job to supervise such a big corporation. And the whole idea actually initiated at Royal Dutch Shell, because in 2004 Royal Dutch Shell had a huge corporate governance scandal Royal Dutch Shell at that time was not one company. It was a joint venture of Shell, the British part, and Royal Dutch, the Dutch part. And it was two companies that had a construct how they were kept together. And under this construct, it was possible that part of the oil reserves were, let's say, a bit tweaked.
Yeah.
So typically, oil companies' value at the stock exchange is mainly the value of their resources underground, gas and oil.
Yeah.
And the scientists can be pretty sure and accurate how much that is. So if you have to correct your oil reserves, let's say by a few percentages, you know, something stinks, something smells, right?
Yeah.
Something's right here. And it was a corporate governance problem. And that was the origin and the initiation. I was in part of a task force of analyzing what had gone wrong there. And we worked with the London Stock Exchange, New York Stock Exchange, with other official agencies in the US. It was very interesting to learn how tough the US acts if they feel numbers on stock exchange are not correct. So the SEC was involved, obviously. I had those experiences. So that was the origin from then starting that institute at the university. And that was actually my first real career step, being the founder. It was my first startup of that institute. And that's where then my career actually started. So that was a big round to get to that point.
Yeah.
For you.
And then you went on being entrepreneur and had this door-to-door.
Yes, exactly.
This was the aim to get less traffic into the towns.
Yes, yes.
But now you changed again your career.
Yes. Well, a few things more happened actually. I'll try to be a bit more leaner, otherwise the sun will set and we're still talking.
Why not?
So that institute's goal was to change German European corporate law, and we succeeded.
Yeah.
So by today, we played some small role in making supervisory boards in Germany more professional. Not like me, the team and the professors involved. It was a big institute eventually. I then became provost and vice president of that university at the age of 28, which I felt at that time is great to do.
Yeah.
Today, I feel it was the biggest mistake in my life. It was
Really?
way too, oh yes, it was way too early. I think Henry Kissinger once said, compared to the White House, Harvard is full of snakes. So, and I would say university is full of strong egos. I wouldn't exclude myself from that, but there were other egos much more stronger, and I was clearly too young and too inexperienced for that role. However, the university was in a crisis at that time, and the management team at that time, I think, did incredible job saving the university from going into difficult waters. But that's a very different story. However, I did that career step, and it was good to feel the pressure of a company being under extreme stress and working under extreme stress. So that was the experience there. So when I left that role, very good friend of mine, Tom, and I had the idea, what's next? Do we want to continue in that kind of academic management role that we had started, or we're still young, we're in our 30s. The internet is growing. On top of the internet, we can build many great solutions, and we looked at mainly two topics. One was a topic in medicine, and the other topic was in transportation.
Yep.
So providing technology to companies doing ride sharing, ride pooling, microtransit, and providing the software.
Yep.
And that was the idea of door-to-door. Obviously, we had some pivots, which means we tested a few things, but eventually that's what the company did. Became a big company with all ups and downs of an entrepreneurial life. We then merged with a company in the Middle East because we were complementary, and together we then went to the New York Stock Exchange. We did an IPO, which also was an incredible experience in all facets. And then 1.5 years later, I left the company and I took almost a year off to recalibrate. And then last summer I was approached by this company if I want to join and be part of the management team of Idealo. So that's where I'm right now.
That's the circle now.
That's the circle. A bit more condensed than what we talked about before.
In all these times and stages and development, do you have, you mentioned before these events that changed your life. Do you have sort of a role model or different you take parts of?
Usually I learned that they disillusion me at one point in time. So once oneself matures more, you see, maybe not. Yes, of course, I had various, encountered various personalities which had facets in their personality which I felt were, let's say, superpowers.
Yeah, this puzzling.
Exactly, it was wow.
Yeah.
But what usually you also learn is their person is more complementary than just that superpower, right? So yeah, there were a few. So the founder of Wittenherdecke, a person who goes by the name of Konrad Schilly, who comes from a very famous family, certainly was one of those figures. Very
but
charismatic person, let's call it this way.
They remain human beings.
Exactly.
With just one facet that attracts.
Exactly. But certainly he shaped me in my early student years, and others more. Today my kids are my idols.
Okay.
Yeah, because their perception of the world and their playfulness and their innocence is really unique.
They're open to everything.
Yes.
And you say your family, your kids, you have impact from there. You do also have, for example, impact in your life from nature or art? Or
yes.
When you do not work, you are curious in what?
Today, as I said, it's mainly my kids.
Yeah.
So I find a lot of art, beauty, and inspiration in, first of all, being reminded of my own inner child once again, of my childhood, so things come up back, but clearly just how they behave, how they approach the world, how they perceive, how they empathize, and how they feel joy is incredible. And so today that's actually where I dedicate most my time with, when not working, being with them in nature, going on little hikes and road trips. So that's what I do most of the time. Actually, I'm not so much the person looking at a piece of art and staying focused for 3 hours there. I would rather want to engage with the artist and discuss with the artist.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, most of them are dead, but so I would then rather try to find out and read about that person, why he created it, or why she was driven by creating that piece.
It's the curiosity.
Exactly.
About
I want
people.
to it's the curiosity. I want to understand. It's like peeling that onion, right? I want to get to that root cause.
Yeah.
Which also is helpful driving a company and leading a company, not to staying at the surface and being superficial, but really going to the root cause and understanding what are the core drivers. And if you want to navigate this ship, you really need to understand how all the pieces work together and what will happen if you say, oh, let's do something here, to know it will impact have on other parts of the organization.
You also, in this website, you mention I'm a business angel.
Yes.
And could you a little bit show us, you said I devote most of my time and energy in helping people. Businesses, companies are also individuals. So you are just advisor and investor also?
So I must say I haven't updated that website now for I think a year, and that was written when I started my garden leave and my free time, right? But even before, I wouldn't say I'm a good investor, right? I'm not. An investor needs a lot of money in order to finance very good research, in order to be able to invest wisely. Since I don't have billions, and from that billions can have a team of 20 people doing research, obviously my bets and my investments are very narrow, and narrow in that term, how do I understand that business? And probably, to be honest, it also has a facet of hobby to it, right? So I'm not a professional investor. However, there are teams that are approaching me that have found their product market fit and now want to scale, and always encounter the same obstacles. And they are very often associated with the founder's role with the organization. And it's with a kid, right? A kid of 3 years of age needs a different father and mother than a kid of 20 years of age. And once an organization is similar like a kid, it grows, it becomes more and more independent, and therefore also the role of the founders needs to evolve and cannot be stagnant. And that typically is one of the core hindering factors of many successful companies really evolving, because the founders will not evolve with the maturity of the organization and always want to keep it, it was so nice 5 years ago when we were all sitting around the table and having a coffee. And it's like telling your son or daughter who has just graduated, always so nice when I was able to change your diapers, yeah? But your son or daughter would say, yeah, that was nice, but don't you dare want to put a diaper on me now, right?
Yeah.
I'm 18.
Yeah.
And it's the same with an organization. An organization also becomes an adult at one point in time, and therefore the founders have to change and evolve in their role and in their approach towards their kid. And as much as I can talk about all the technical instruments and approaches and processes that are relevant for companies growing, what I have observed very often, that part is not spoken about a lot, yet a very powerful determinant if the company can go big and if the individuals, particularly the founders, are happy with what's happening. And very often they're kind of in between and, no, I don't want it to become like that because I don't feel comfortable about it, and blah, 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 blah. And since that is something I have an eye on, I'm very often called into those situations where companies are about to take off, but the founding team cannot let go. And it's not only cannot let go, it's also grab the new, right? So there's a new role for you. It's like with father and mother, right? Your role with a 10-year-old kid is not to change the diapers anymore, it's to help the kid with their homework. So there's something new. But you have to let go for one part. So, as business angel, it's very often that topic that I look at growing companies.
That's the advisory part.
Yes.
And
also when I'm invested, also it's typically
you get involved in all these patterns or mechanisms. Yes.
And since I had been founder myself, I can relate on that journey, right? On the frustration, on the I'm not the right person for the organization anymore, and that doesn't feel good. And your team doesn't tell you. They become passive aggressive, because on the one side they love you and they know you're the founder. On the other side, they all know you're not catering to their needs, and you're behaving like a parent figure who's just not suitable for the maturity of the organization anymore. And having had that experience myself, and having had the challenge to evolve myself under very painful circumstances, I might admit, it makes it easier to engage in such conversations with founding teams.
And it definitely needs somebody from outside.
It definitely needs someone from outside, and it definitely needs someone who has had that experience. It doesn't make any, very often venture capitalists come in and say, you must do this, you must do that. And when those investors haven't had that founder's journey themselves,
yep.
It's hard for them to relate. It's hard for them to then establish a connection, which is necessary to have really meaningful conversation, and on that basis then open the corridor to discuss, let's try to go and cross that bridge to that new chapter together, and let's look how that feels. And when that happens, founders can become an extremely powerful multiplier for the success of the company going forward. And if it doesn't happen, it will be very often the opposite. Yeah.
Really?
Yes. There are many companies out there who have immense potential, but who cannot grow, who have that glass ceiling because the founders have difficulties actually to mature. And it is tough.
That's really tough. And you said before, they do not talk really to each other. And
it is a very intimate thing to admit,
yeah.
I might not be the right person, or I feel I might not be the right person for the organization. So realizing this is, the first chapter. Admitting it is another chapter. Talking to it with others is another chapter.
Yeah.
And that doesn't too often happen. And founders need help on that journey.
Yeah,
as much as mothers and fathers, I feel, need help on their journey of parenthood. I think we as a society are not so great at that. I think we're learning how to help parents on that journey, and we're not
the opposite, because everything is focused on helping the children, everything to bring forward the children, and the parents have to learn also. I never thought of that. That's interesting. So
we usually copy, unfortunately, the patterns of our parents, and then you have all the lineage on your shoulder, and then it's more by luck, right? If that lineage has learned or has had impulses to really come to good solutions and good realizations, then you're lucky. If not, you're left in the field, right?
Yeah, or the opposite, the parents think, I will not do what my parents did, absolutely not. And that ends up also very interesting sometimes.
Yes.
Do you have a sort of utopia or ideas, I'm sure you have, how the ideal world should be or could be or would develop? Don't look at me like that. It's so interesting because everybody pictures for himself how it could go, but also generally, you having kids, what would be for you personally ideal? Where should we go to?
I suppose very early on I exchanged that with something else.
Yeah.
So the idea of how something should be in, let's say, ideal state, or an ideal, not state in terms of state government, but state like as something abstract. The empathy part drove me to learn about how we are as human beings. And we are an interesting creature, aren't we?
Yeah, we are.
So still we really don't know where we come from and where we go. So if you ask me what really is a core driver, it's more that question. Where do we come from and where do we go? Because I think that's more substantial than just having a vision for me. I have goals, I would say, and those goals are probably I always try to falsify and verify my goals with reality. So maybe I'm too pragmatic already, right? So maybe with 30 years of age, I would have given you a different answer. With 44 years of age, turning 45 soon, I look at goals and where things should be, but I don't want to describe a state of, of a company, of a society, of a bub that is utterly unrealistic when looking who should compose this, right? And it will be human beings. So who are we and what's our capacities and what's our limits? So I'm more interested in, again, where do we come from, where do we go, how are we as human beings, how do our impulses come up under certain circumstances, why can we be so violent on the one side and so empathetic and caring on the other side. It's really hard. If you look at our planet from, I don't know, many light years away and look at our species, you would say, isn't this an interesting bunch?
Yeah.
On the one hand, they really evolved amazingly, and on the other hand, they are hitting their heads like really the rawest animals. So looking at that, I would be defining my goals and my direction and where we should go. But since I don't want to waste time with things that will never work because we are as human beings who we are, that's maybe why I've become more realistic over time.
But
you see, with the door-to-door, the ambition was to provide, I think that was something very ambitious, very visionary, saying with an optimal system, there's something called the Lisbon study, once conducted by the OECD, I think 10 years ago. And they were simulating how an optimized mass transit system in Lisbon could reduce almost 85% of all private vehicles.
Yep.
Obviously, that has massive impact on the city. If 85% of the vehicles can be reduced by a fully functioning, highly dynamic, on-demand public transport system, you have less vehicles on the road, so more space in the city, you have less congestion, you have less time spent in traffic jams, etc. So the effects are clear. However, human beings like to have, at least for some time, their individual car and to sit in their, let's say, private space if they can. So such visions have to be matched with the reality of human beings and their behaviors and their preferences. So it was clear that this vision will always remain an utopia, as you said.
Yeah.
Now that you hinted that, maybe also because I have kids right now, I don't feel I have so much time for utopia.
Reality.
Yes.
Yeah.
I want to spend my time with things
Meaningful.
where there can be impact and not where it's nice to describe and wish and hope and then work on something, but it will never see the face of the earth, even in a little tiny bit. It will always remain a dream.
But door-to-door is successful.
Yeah, it's successful, but it's a long way to get to the state of the Lisbon study where we can replace the private vehicles with a fully functioning on-demand autonomous mass transit.
But I think it's quite impressive knowing about human realities, human traits, and our sometimes obvious incapacity of learning, that you stay so optimistic.
Yes.
That's really great.
Yeah, that's the kids coming back into the play, right? Yeah.
Is there something you would you're here, they are listening, I'm listening. You would like to tell us, like, outlook?
On what?
On human beings, on this study object of yours about people, because sometimes it's really difficult because you think it will never change. We have education systems that are not helpful and all that stuff, but you keep on going.
So number one, I think we are in a very fascinating point in time where, driven by technology, we are able to learn more. So right now there's this thing called LiDAR. LiDAR is a sort of sensor where you can see structures, even underground. And it has become fairly cheap to get LiDAR technology onto a drone. And they flew those LiDAR drones on the Amazon, right? And they saw suddenly vast structures of ancient civilizations that we don't even know about. So we get to learn, I think, more and more who we are and who we come from. And I think we've really just started to enter that path, allowed and driven by and catalyzed by technology. So that. On the other hand, driven by technology, we can now look into outer space much more. And we every year have to falsify or are falsifying theories or perceptions that we had about space.
Yeah.
And if you look into physics, I'm very, as you see, I'm more interested into the science part and what's going on. And into physics, the fight in physics is phenomenal to see what's going on in physics right now and how physicists all around the world are looking at, what have we been doing over the last 20, 30 years? What has come out of our fundamental research in the last 20 or 30 years? I mean, think back 150 years ago. Phenomenal findings in physics, almost, every 5 to 10 years. X-rays and chemistry was involved in that too, but led to the atomic and hydrogen bomb then eventually. But in the first part of the 20th century, I mean, physics was just delivering like crazy in fundamental physics research. And now it's become a bit
Calming.
Yeah. What's the reason behind that? Are we on the wrong path? Did we follow a false theoretical approach? And there's a incredible conflict in the physics community, starting, I would say, not yet at the peak. And it has a lot to do with looking at, what has come out of it on the one hand, and looking on new findings that contradict the standard model that we are following in physics at the moment. So I think it is a fascinating time where we will learn more on that regard. And I think by that we will also learn more about us as human beings. Another thing is, you and me 100 years ago didn't have that immense access to knowledge than we have today. Yeah. So the kind of learning curve for us as human beings today is much more higher than to any civilization, at least that we know about. So I think that is fascinating too. We today can much more see patterns maybe of things that are going on right now in Europe that might, some say, we have situations like the 1910s, 1920s, well, maybe like the 1890s. I don't know, but even being able to having access to this vast amount of knowledge will do something to us as a species, as mankind. However, as you and I know, our brain, when we are in fear and under stress, behaves exactly the way a few million years ago. So, but that's also a learning, right? So let's not get into stress, because then we can have all sensors available. Once we get into stress, it's very binary. It's attack or run away.
Yeah, and the big hope is all this science about neurological stuff and how you can even shape your brain.
Yes.
And that's also, hope lies in science. Can I say that like this?
Exactly, and that's what we need to ensure. And that's why I also, that's why I like any institution and force that is for freedom and for plurality. And period. But coming back to the physics parts, I think the very interesting part will be the discussion about gravity. I don't really know how gravity, like I know what gravity is, like from the school book, right? But we cannot replicate it.
No.
And as far as I know, that is, or that I find it very interesting. That is now the discussion. The discussion again comes up in the physics community. How could we replicate it, and what could we do if we were able to work with gravity? If we could build gravity ourselves, I mean, that would bring us into a new dimension, right? Yeah. That's why I hope that in physics during my lifetime we will see new fascinating encounters, and looking at the speed of how new results are being produced in science. Unfortunately, not in fundamental physics, but in other areas. I hope that in physics we see more to come, because those are the fundamental aspects. Where do we come from and where do we go? I think that's really important. I hope it's not too esoteric for you.
No, not at all. We have here the perfect example. We are in the old part of Axel Springer, and we said we could move over to the new building.
Yes.
That's what we do.
Okay.
Where do we come from? Where do we go to?
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.